Hello, and welcome back to Story Time with Eric Zimmer. Where we last left off in Where the Red Fern Grows, Billy Coleman, the narrator, was going off to Tallequah, approximately 30 miles from where he lives, to go get his 2 hunting dogs that he finally got enough money for. Right now, he's up to the part where he's at the depot. Let's see what happens next. You ready? Alright. Let's begin. Chapter 5. On arriving at the depot, my nerve failed me. I was afraid to go in. I didn't know what I was scared of, but I was scared. Before going around to the front, I peeked in a window. The station master was in his office looking at some papers. He was wearing a funny little cap that had no top in it. Probably an early form of a visor. He looked friendly enough, but I still couldn't muster up enough courage to go in. I cocked my ear to see if I could hear puppies crying, but I could hear nothing. A bird started chirping. It was a yellow canary in a cage. The station master walked over and gave it some water. I thought, anyone that is kind to birds surely wouldn't be mean to a boy. With my courage built up, I walked around to the front and eased myself past the office. He glanced at me and turned back to the papers. I walked clear around the depot and again walked slowly past the office. Glancing from the corner of my eye, I saw the station master looking at me and smiling. He opened the door and came out on the platform. I stopped and leaned against the building. Yawning and stretching his arms, he said, "Sure is hot today. Doesn't look like it's ever going to rain." I looked up in the sky and said, "Yes, sir. It is hot. We sure could do with a good rain. We need one bad up where I come from." He asked me where I lived. I told him, "Up the river a ways." "You know," he said, "I have some puppies in there for a boy that lives up on the river. His name is Billy Coleman. I know his dad, but I've never seen his boy. I figured he would be in after them today." On hearing this remark, my heart jumped clear up in my throat. I thought surely it was going to hop right out on the depot platform. I looked up and tried to tell him who I was, but something went wrong. When the words finally came out, they sounded like the squeaky old pulley on our well when Mama drew up a bucket of water. I could see a twinkle in the station master's eyes. He came over and laid his hand on my shoulder. In a friendly voice, he said, "So you're Billy Coleman. How's your dad?" I told him Papa was fine and handed him the slip my grandpa had given me. "They sure are fine-looking pups," he said. "You'll have to go around to the freight door." I'm sure my feet never touched the ground as I flew around the building. He unlocked the door and I stepped in, looking for my dogs. I couldn't see anything but boxes, barrels, old trunks, and some rolls of barbed wire. The kindly station master walked over to one of the boxes. "Do you want box and all?" he asked. I told him I didn't want the box. All I wanted was the dogs. "How are you going to carry them?" he asked. "I think they're a little too young to follow." I held out my gunny sack. He looked at me and looked at the sack. Chuckling, he said, "Well, I guess dogs can be carried that way, same as anything else. We'll have to cut a couple of holes to stick their heads through so they won't smother." Getting a claw hammer, he started tearing off the top of the box. As nails gave way and boards splintered, I heard several puppy whimpers. I didn't walk over. I just stood and waited. After what seemed like hours, the box was open. He reached in, lifted the pups out, and set them down on the floor. "Well, there they are," he said. "What do you think of them?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I could do was stare at them. They seemed to be blinded by the light. Makes me think of the song by Manfred Mann. I love that song. And kept blinking their eyes. One sat down on his little rear and started crying. The other one was waddling around and whimpering. I wanted so much to step over and pick them up. Several times I tried to move my feet, but they seemed to be nailed to the floor. I knew the pups were mine. All mine. Yet I couldn't move. My heart started aching like a drunk grasshopper. I tried to swallow and couldn't. My Adam's apple wouldn't work. One pup started my way. I held my breath. On he came until I felt a scratchy little foot on mine. The other pup followed. A warm puppy tongue caressed my sore foot. I heard the station master say, "They already know you." I bent down and gathered them in my arms. I buried my face between their wiggling bodies and cried. The station master, sensing something more than just 2 dogs and a boy, waited in silence. Rising with the 2 pups held close to my chest, I asked if I owed anything. He said, "There's a small feed bill, but I'll take care of it. It's not much anyway." Taking his knife, he cut 2 slits on the sack. He put the pups in it and worked their heads through the holes. As he handed the sack to me, he said, "Well, there you are. Goodbye, and good hunting." Walking down the street towards town, I thought, now maybe the people won't stare at me when they see what I've got. After all, not every boy owns 2 good hounds. Turning the corner onto the main street, I threw out my chest. I hadn't gone far before I realized that the reception I got wasn't what I thought it would be. People began to stop and stare. Some even snickered. I couldn't understand why they were staring. Surely it couldn't be at the 2 beautiful hound pups sticking out of the gunny sack. Thinking that maybe I had a hole in the seat of my breeches, I looked over to my reflection in a plate glass window. I craned my neck for a better view of my rear. I could see a patch there all right, and a few threadbare spots, but no whiteness was showing through. I figured that the people were just jealous because they didn't have 2 good hounds. I saw a drunk coming. Oh, God. He was staggering all over the street. Just as he was passing me, I heard him stop. As I looked back, I saw he was staring wide-eyed at my sack. Closing his eyes, he rubbed them with his hands. Opening them again, he stared. Shaking his head, he staggered on down the street. All around, people began to roar with laughter. Someone shouted, "What's the matter, John? You seeing things today?" I hurried on, wanting to get away from the stares and the snickers. It wouldn't have happened again in 100 years, but there they came. The same 2 old women I had met before. We stopped and had another glaring fight. One said, "I declare." The other one snorted, "Well, I never." My face burned. I couldn't take any more. After all, a man can stand so much and no more. In a loud voice I said, "You may have these people fooled with those expensive-looking feathers in your hats, but I know what they are. They're goose feathers painted with iodine." One started to say something, but her words were drowned out by the roaring laughter from all around. Gathering up their long skirts, they swished on down the street. All around me, people began to shout questions and laugh. One wanted to know if I had the mother in the sack. Storekeeper stepped out and gawked. I could see the end of the street, but it looked as if it were 100 miles away. My face was as red as a fox's tail. I ducked my head, tightened my grip on the sack, and walked on. I don't know where they came from, but like chickens coming home to roost, they flocked around me. Most of them were about my age. Some were a little bigger, some smaller. They ganged around me, screaming and yelling. They started clapping their hands and chanting, "The dog boys come to town! The dog boys come to town!" My heart burst. Tears came rolling. The day I had waited for so long had turned black and ugly. The leader of the gang was about my size. He had a dirty, freckled face, and his 2 front teeth were missing. I suppose he had lost them in a back alley fight. Or maybe they were his baby teeth. Who knows? His shock of yellow, sunburnt hair bobbed up and down as he skipped and jumped to the rhythm of the dog boy song. He wore a pair of cowboy boots. They were 2 sizes too big for him, no doubt handed down by an older brother. He stomped on my right foot, and I looked down and saw a drop of blood ooze out from under the broken nail. It hurt like the dickens, but I gritted my teeth and walked on. Ace pulled the ear of my little girl pup. Pulled the ear of my little girl pup. I heard her painful cry. That was too much. I hadn't worked too long, hard years for my pups to have some freckle-faced punk pull their ears. Swinging the sack from my shoulder, I walked over and set it down in a doorway. As I turned around to face the mob, I doubled up my fists and took a Jack Dempsey stance. Jack Dempsey was a famous boxer. For those who don't know. Freckle-faced said, "So you want a fight?" He came in swinging. I reached my way back in Arkansas somewhere. By the time my fists had traveled all the way down to the Cherokee Strip, there was a lot of power behind it. Smack on the end of Freckles' nose, it exploded. With a loud grunt, he sat down in the dusty street. Grabbing his nose in both hands, he started rocking and moaning. I saw the blood squeezing out between his fingers. Another sailed on. He didn't want to fight. He wanted to wrestle. He stuck a finger in my mouth. I ground down, shaking his hand and yelling like the hoot owls were after him. He ran across the street. Another one bored in. I aimed for his eye, but my aim was a little low. I caught him in the Adam's apple. A sick look came over his face. Bending over, croaking like a bullfrog that had been caught by a water moccasin, he started going around in a circle. But there were too many of them. By sheer weight and numbers, they pulled me down. I managed to twist over on my stomach and bury my face in my arms. I could feel them beating and kicking my body. All at once, the beating stopped. I heard loud cries from the gang. Turning over on my back, I was just in time to see a big marshal plant a number 12 boot in the seat of the last kid. I just knew I was next. I wondered if he'd kick me while I was down. I lay where I was. He stared down at me. I closed my eyes. I felt a hand as big as an anvil clamp on my shoulder. I thought, he's going to stand me up and then knock me down. He raised me to a sitting position. His deep, friendly voice said, "Are you all right, son?" I opened my eyes. There was a smile on his wide, rugged face. In a choking voice, I said, "Yes, sir. I'm all right." He helped me to my feet. His big hand started brushing the dust up from my clothes. "Those kids are pretty tough, son," he said. "They're really not bad. They'll grow up someday." "Marshal," I said, "I wouldn't have fought them, but they pulled my pup's ears." He looked over to my sack. One pup had worked its way almost out through the hole. The other one's head and two little paws were sticking